Well, good morning, everyone. How's everyone feeling? You okay? You ready to go? Yeah? Have you had a good weekend so far? Oh, good. Right. So, it's quite a busy weekend though, really, isn't it? So on Good Friday, we had a Good Friday service, and we've been going through the steps of Easter. And we looked at how Jesus was sent to the cross. And that's a big thing. So he came on the scene, and he brought these teachings, didn't he? He brought these concepts that the people around him, they didn't really like, did they? No. Evidently, they didn't like him. They got rid of him. They thought, no, I don't like this. This is not for me. So he brought these teachings, these concepts, and it upset the status quo. It upset what already was established. And the religious leaders and the people around him, they decided to send him to the cross, which, as we've looked at on Friday over the weekend and before that, it was a punishment that was reserved for the worst of the worst, really. So even by a legal standpoint, perhaps that would not have been the punishment he deserved. Does that make sense? So he was given the worst of the worst. Now, when he's on that cross, he makes some statements. A famous scripture from John 19:30, it says, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. And we looked at also on Friday and Palm Sunday, going into this season, that what Jesus was trying to do was not establish a victory in a worldly sense. See, the people around him, one of the reasons they didn't like him was because they had an idea of what their Messiah looked like. Yeah? You know, if you could picture right now, who would your ideal leader or whatever be? We would probably all have a different image, wouldn't we? You'd think, what traits, what qualities would you like? Maybe some would have alignment, but we'd probably picture someone different, wouldn't we? So the people in Jesus' time, because they were under a lot of oppression from the Romans, their idea was they wanted someone to come and liberate them from that oppression. Makes sense? So really, they had this idea of a Messiah in their mind was a military leader. They thought someone is going to come. They're going to be strong. They're going to be powerful. They're going to be confident. They're going to be commanding. They will have an army behind them. And as George preached last week, we saw on his arrival on Palm Sunday, he rocks up on a donkey. Not exactly the commanding figure you would think. Now, the people were still, giving him a bit of time of the day, weren't they? They were still thinking, well, okay, maybe this is the Messiah. Let's celebrate him as he rolls in on the donkey. If you've got to make a big impression, you've got to make a parade. What vehicle are you choosing? You'd probably want something impressive, I guess, wouldn't you, from a earthly standpoint, and not I'm not going to start naming cars, because who knows what we all drive, but you'd probably pick something impressive. So he rocks in on this donkey, and the people, they're still celebrating, but as we see, they're not overly with him. So he gets put on this cross, and he makes this statement, "It is finished." So what is finished? See, his victory, he's not come to liberate them from the Romans, which was very disappointing for them. But what he says, what I'm doing, I'm bringing in a system. There is this thing that exists, this darkness, this spiritual thing, this thing we call sin and death. And what I'm doing is I am bringing a victory over those things. And it might not make sense to most people, because it's quite an abstract thing when we start to talk about darkness and evil and death. Okay, maybe we understand, but there is a death behind the death. So he's coming to bring a victory over these things that actually all people would no longer need to live under the shadow of those things. Does that make sense? Which the people around him were not overly concerned with necessarily. They had their immediate issues, and they wanted to deal with those. So he goes on, he makes these statements, and beforehand, before he's on the cross, he says this, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That's Matthew 27:46. And I love this, because when you look at them on the face of it, these statements that are being made, these key statements, when you look on the face of it, you can think, he's going through some dark things, what's going on? And scholars will say that he's actually alluding to Psalm 22, which was written about 1,000 years beforehand. And part of that psalm, it says this. Imagine this in the context of Jesus, okay? Dogs surround me. A pack of villains encircles me. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garments. Now, those who are familiar with the Easter story will know that those things pretty much happened exactly. So this psalm, written 1,000 years before, that actually perfectly encapsulates what's taking place. So why does Jesus quote this psalm? The statements he's saying, quote the psalm. Because remember, the people of that day, it's not like us, maybe we're on the internet all the time scrolling, They would have been really familiar with these things. So when he starts saying this statement, it's almost a loaded term. If he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? People will know what he means. When he says it is finished, people will know what that means, what that is alluding to. And it's actually painting this picture, again, as we looked at Palm Sunday, that this was prophesied many years before, and it's creating this full circle moment. Now, what gets me is, again, alluding back to the Palm Sunday people, can't crowds be fickle? Have you ever noticed that? And just people in general, we've probably all had those people that when something's going great, they're with you. They love you, it's great. But then maybe something isn't going so well, or you're going through a difficult time and nowhere to be seen. Have you had that? Experienced that before? See, even when people are fickle, we're told that God is faithful. Even if, and we might not even be meaning to be fickle. I think it's probably just human nature. We've probably all been in that camp. We've probably all been fickle to someone or something at some point, and someone's probably felt betrayed by us at some point, and we might not have even meant to. Because it's just part of that human condition. We don't mean to do these things sometimes. I mean, some people do, and they need a lesson in their own, I guess. But even in our fickle nature, God is faithful. And what he's doing on the cross is Jesus would have had every opportunity to perhaps give out a scolding or something like that, and he doesn't do that. If you buy a gift for someone, imagine this, okay, you buy a really expensive gift for someone. Picture a friend or someone you really get on with, someone you like, and you bought an expensive gift. Have you got it in mind? Okay, you've just bought them something really good, okay? Now, a few days before you are due to give that gift, they fall out with you. Not only do they fall out with you, they betray you big, okay? Something you thought they would never do, they did it. They did it. It sucks. You've still got that gift. What are we going to do with it? Who's going over there anyway? Like, well, I just want you to have this, I love you so much. I know you've hurt me, you've wronged me, but I just want you to have this gift. It's the greatest thing. Who's still doing that? No. I thought we'd at least get one hand. Human nature is probably going to take over. You think, they do not deserve this gift. You think, well, I've been so good to them, and look how they have thanked me. Look what they've done to me. I'm not giving them this gift anymore. So Jesus, he's arriving on Palm Sunday. He sees all these faces saying, oh, you're great. You're the Messiah. This is amazing. You're going to liberate us. Fantastic. And he's probably thinking, they're not going to like what comes next. They're not going to like this. So those same people on Palm Sunday that celebrated him were the same people just days later demanding actually that he goes to the cross. The people were given a choice. So the governor, Pontius Pilate, I can't get my head around this. The governor gave the people a choice. Okay, so he's a Roman. He's not really that bothered about the religious drama going on. And he has Jesus, and he has this other person, Barabbas, up. And this day is a special day, and he can pardon someone. So he asks the people, we've heard a lot about pardons recently, but he can pardon someone of all their crimes. So he asks the people, who do you want to be free? Now, Barabbas, on the one hand, we're told very little about him, but scholars do seem to believed that he was legitimately some kind of criminal. He was a bad guy. And then we've got Jesus, who obviously we all follow. So he asks the crowd, who do you want to go free today? Who's going free? Who do you want? And the crowd say, the religious leaders say, give us Barabbas. Free Barabbas. And Jesus let him go to the cross. I mean, how does that happen? Can you get your head around that? I suppose we shouldn't joke about it, but we see cancel culture today, don't we? There's something we don't like, people go for it. That is it in the extreme. Okay, imagine if we could just have a poll. Like, how does that happen in the extreme? So the people picked Barabbas and not Jesus. So betrayal hurts, but yet when he's on the cross, again, if you've got all the powers of God Almighty, you're on that cross and you start to see these faces, you might even recognize people who are actually, you were with me last week. You said what a great job I was doing, and now, but he still goes through with it. And I think really we can dramatize it or we can make some jokes about it, but the reality is that he knew what was going to happen. He knew. He knew that the human heart can be fickle. He knew the people celebrating him one day may curse him the next. And what is his response anyway? He says, I'm going to die for you. He says, I know you're not going to be with me all the time. You're not going to get it. But I'm going to die for you. On the days when you're blessing me and on the days when you're cursing me, I am going to die for you. Because I love you. And you might not get it. You might not have encountered that kind of love before. But the love he has for us is that kind of love. How powerful is that? That he would give his life for us. The term that it says, it is finished. Scholars would say they'd find the same term for paid in full, and it would be used in their society, in their community, and even in a legal context. If someone owed a debt or had to serve a sentence to someone else or a prison sentence or something like that, the word that was used, I won't try and pronounce the original words, but it was this paid in full, that the debt is over. And that same term is used. So when someone finishes their prison sentence, they're given this term, paid in full, gone. And the same term that was used for that darkness, that death, our sin, it says paid in full, is gone. Have you ever met those, hopefully not, but you met the kind of person that likes to they just know how to push your buttons, don't they? Ever had your buttons pushed a little bit? Maybe some of us have. They just know, whatever you do not want them to bring up, that's coming up, okay? That is going to be a topic of conversation. Maybe some kind of insecurity we're feeling, or something we did in the past, and maybe we've got some shame about it ourselves. And just some people, I swear, they have a gift for just identifying these weaknesses and thinking, let's just talk about that. And they might do it in such a gentle way, might come across as even caring, but they have this gift of sort of bringing this stuff up. And most of us, we don't really like that, do we? It makes us feel a bit uncomfortable. If there's some things we're trying not to talk about, and God, who knows everything and knows the number of hairs on our head, the Bible says, if we have any. He knows us completely and intimately. He knows every thought. And yet he is never once trying to hold shame over us. And I love that. I love that, because if anyone had any right to do that, it would be the creator of all things. And he's not there trying to go through our past and find parts where we've failed or where we've messed up and hold it over us as some form of debt or shame. He's saying, I see that completely. And I'm going to be with you entirely through it. And if we do need to change a path or whatever's going on in our life, he says, I'm going to be with you through that till the end. It is finished. Some scholars, they say this, it's not just that a debt was paid, but it's completely removed. I've got a background in criminology. My main degree was in criminology, and with that you look a lot about with the police system, legal systems, things like that, and we have something called we all have a record, don't we? Well, hopefully, maybe we don't, but the powers that be, they will have information on us. Even maybe we haven't even done something, but there may be a log about us somewhere on some database. And the term we get given here is that not only is something just cleared, but it's completely deleted. It's erased. There's no log of it. It's not okay, that's just served, we'll put it to one side, that's in your spent section. It just doesn't exist. It's gone. And sometimes I think we can take that for granted, because when Jesus was on that cross, that is what he was achieving for everyone. So we know how the story goes, and he perishes on that cross. And what gets me is the people did not expect it. They didn't see it coming. How did they not see it coming? In Matthew 16:21, it says this: "From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day will be raised to life." So he told them beforehand, he told his disciples, he says, this is what's going to happen. So, okay, guys, what's going to happen? We're going to go to Jerusalem. Some stuff it's going to kick off, okay? Be ready. It's like everyone's going to come against me, and they're going to kill me. And then I'll be raised to life again on the third day. I mean, what do you think they heard when he was saying that? Because we're told when this story is unfolding, his disciples were shocked. And I think it just raises such an interesting point that sometimes we can hear something, we can know something, but we don't hold it, we don't take it on board. Have you ever had a conversation with someone and you're not quite sure if they're listening, but maybe they've already got something in their mind, a response they already want to say. This is people looking at each other. Hey, there's no finger pointed, all right? There's like some nudging going on. Have you ever had a conversation that you think they're not listening? Like, this is for you. This is for you. Here it is. This is why we come out on Easter Sunday. You need to listen up. We can have this dialogue. We can have this engagement. But sometimes people aren't actually hearing what you're saying. They're just preparing to give a predetermined response. Like, well, I've got my opinion. I've got my thoughts. You just say what you need to say, and I'm coming at you anyway. We can be so restricted by our own opinions sometimes, can't we? Yeah? Some of us can. So the disciples knew what was going to happen. Jesus told them, but they were still surprised. I think a lot of us, we can find ourselves in that camp, especially for me. We can look around at the world, and sometimes I just think, what is going on with everything, everywhere? And sometimes you just think, Lord, what's going on? You think, if you have power over all things, let's just sort this out, okay? There's just some stuff over here or over there. Let's just get it sorted. And then I have to come back to the Bible, and I remind myself that actually it says this is all going to take place. It says that this is what the theological term, this is a fallen world. And unfortunately, while ever we are dwelling on this side of eternity, there will be problems. There will be issues. There will be pain. The Bible says that the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. It would be so easy. The Pharisees, they had this culture of saying, look, if everything's going well in your life, it is a symbol that shows God is with you, that you're doing well. And those where things aren't going well, it's like God's not with you. And one of the things Jesus was changing was that is not true. He was saying, actually, how well you're doing materially is not necessarily an indicator of whether God's with you or not. Because the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. Now remember, he was bringing a new spiritual way. So, something happens, and the resurrection, we're told, it takes place. And his disciples were caught off guard with that. Now, some had, when you read the story, some were more involved. Some people, went to check. And others, when they were told the news, Jesus has risen, they were thinking, they had their skeptic hat on. They were thinking, no, that can't be. That can't happen. It's one of those things you're taught at uni to think critically on things and things like that, and that can be really helpful. But sometimes when we're trying to understand, the mysteries of the universe or powers that are beyond our comprehension, it just doesn't work. It falls flat. And there really is a place, as cliche as it sounds, but sometimes you just have to put your faith in something. Because I'm a person who likes to have all the answers. Does anyone like to have all the answers to things? If you things frustrate you if you don't know how it works. I need to know. Okay, I'm like, Lord, I need to know. I want to know. And that rarely happens in aspects of faith, because the clue is in the name. You have to put a belief into something. You may not fully know, but you have to put your faith into it. So he's raised to life, and he goes through this process of revealing himself to disciples, and again, he's trying to complete that process of bringing in this new way. And we see how the early church, it really does change over time, and it goes from this fickle period of, okay, Jesus has died and it's all over. Let's just go back to what we know. This has not worked for me, so I'm going to return to what's comfortable. I'm going to give this back. What I had hold of, I'm going to put that down and go back to what I know. And over time, we see that a conviction really takes root in the early church. Does that make sense? We can take things so for granted. But the early church, they had a tough time. They had a tough time. That a real pressure came against them. And N.T. Wright says this: the disciples didn't go to their deaths for a metaphor. They went to their deaths because they were convinced Jesus rose physically and historically. They accepted this core belief that one day, as he was raised again, there would be a resurrection for others. Which again, from our earthly mind, we can think, no, how can that be? And again, many of you know, I really enjoy space, my own space, and the cosmos, the universe. Why do I like it? Because it just resets my perspective. So whenever we come to a place where we think actually we sort of know everything, we know what's going on, all we need to do is look at the cosmos to realize we know practically nothing about what's going on. Does that make sense? I follow it because I find it interesting, but different theories, academic theories come around quite frequently, or new pieces of information come out, and it just changes everything we thought we knew. And it's just such an interesting process and concept, because we can get so confident with what we know, but we could really be so wrong. How long would it take a plane to fly across the earth? We know this. Just a normal plane. It's going across the earth once. How many hours do you think? No one knows. No pilots? Really? Maybe they could do it in 24 hours-ish, maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more, depending on I don't know, maybe some pilot speed. Who knows how that works? But imagine, okay, one of the largest stars we know about, okay? Really catchy name. I'll use the example a lot. Can anyone remember what it's called? Really catchy. Big star. What's it called? VY Canis Majoris. Just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? I know. One of the biggest stars we currently see, they've probably found more now because that's been known for quite a while. If you take, I know you physically couldn't because a commercial airliner would not be able to fly around something like that, but just for the distance, to get a scope of scale, if you were to fly around that one time, this star, how long do you think it would take? It takes about a day for our Earth, okay? So this star, we're just going around it once. How big is it? How long is that going to take? Anyone have a guess? 2 hours? You're going to be shocked, Jackie. I can tell you that. We've got a year. Ooh, does anyone think longer than a year? Anyone think shorter than a year? Anyone think longer than a year? Anyone think longer than, 2 years? 10 years? 100 years? I mean, we wouldn't all be able to make that flight though, would we? Now. They say around 1,000 years to just go around it once at the same speed it takes to go around the Earth now, if we're going with the data that they provide. Isn't that mind-blowing? And that same star is absolutely nothing in comparison to what's out there. You know, I find it fascinating. The distance, even in between galaxies, is almost incomprehensible. There's this whole dark space, they call it. You know, we've got our own galaxy, which is far bigger than we could ever possibly imagine, but then there's all this dark space, and there are more galaxies out there than we can even count. But we get that. You know, where they make a bigger telescope every now and again. According to the data, we have to put some faith in the data because we can't do this ourselves. And then they say, look, we can see even more stuff out there. So we can't really be sure of anything. And they say in dark space, you know, there could be like rogue planets or all sorts just taking place out there. I mean, how terrifying is that? All this stuff we take for granted. My point is the universe, to me, is incredible. And we know so little about it. And that feeds into my faith. Because I think, don't come to a place where you just think, that can't be because it doesn't seem reasonable. I haven't observed it before. Because a key part of the Christian faith, the Christian theology, is this resurrection. And maybe we don't talk about it every week or anything like that, but over Easter, it is a period we home in on it because we do believe that there is a spiritual world out there that we can't necessarily see or detect with our own eyes, but that there is more to life than simply what we see. And that in that space, who knows what takes place?